Hi, happy Friday. It's Friday and it's some more quarantine story time here. We're back with more War and Peace. Hope everyone's having a great week. Hope you're staying positive. Hopefully you're moving forward. I've been getting a lot of businessy stuff done around the house. What else? Signed that petition to remove Confederate flags. Hope you guys can all jump on that. Also, don't forget the 8 Can't Wait. And making donations to Black Lives Matter, NAACP, the Justice Fund, lots of other great things out there. I'll put them in the description. And there's something, oh yeah. Also, I think I mentioned maybe in the comments, but I'll definitely add it again to the description here. There's channels on YouTube that play music and stuff, but donate any of the money that they receive from ad revenue to charitable causes. So there is one up for Black Lives Matter and sending money to Black Lives Matter movement, or I think the one I was streaming right now is like that. It sends money to the NAACP. So that's cool. So you can always just have it running in the background, listen to music, or if you don't like it, just mute it and still have it running. And even if you can't donate money right now, maybe money is tight, you can still use your choices to help generate revenue for lots of great causes. So that is that. It's also Pride Month. Happy Pride. And there's also some Pride channels that you can also do the same streaming to support organizations that support LGBTQIA rights. So get out there, support the other humans out there. Hey, also got the live chat up. Feel free to say hi. And we're going to jump back in. As I told you guys yesterday, we finished Volume 2, Part 2. So we are now in Volume 2, Part 3 today, starting that with Section 1, and we'll read through Section 6, Feeling Ambitious because it's a Friday. And because, like I said yesterday, we are a third of the way through the book. So I'm really just, feeling that momentum, ready to move forward. And I want to be able to say that about so many things in the world right now. And I can't. I can say, so about some things. Yeah, yeah, woohoo, we're moving along here. So I can say that about our War and Peace reading, and hopefully maybe some of that about the justice for George Floyd. And I know they reopened Breonna Taylor's case, which is great because that's just ridiculous. But there's a lot of other places. There's a lot of work still needs to be done. So, like I said, in the book, we're only a third of the way through. Whether there are more than that in the rest of the world, don't know. But still, feel that momentum. Let's keep going. So, without further ado, let's jump back into War and Peace. Like I said, live chat's up. Drop a line, say hey, and share some love out there, people. All right. War and Peace, Volume 2, Part 3, Section 1. And where we ended Part 2, if you recall, with Nikolai Rostov trying to get help for Denisov's military court case and seeing the Emperor Alexander interact with Bonaparte and then getting really drunk. So, new section, Part 3, Section 1. In 1808, the Emperor Alexander went to Erfurt for a meeting with the Emperor Napoleon. And there was much talk in Petersburg high society about the grandeur of this solemn meeting. In 1809, the closeness of the two rulers of the world, as Napoleon and Alexander were called, had reached the point that, when Napoleon declared war on Austria that year, a Russian corps went abroad to assist their former enemy Bonaparte against their former ally, the Austrian Emperor, and there was talk in high circles about the possibility of marriage between Napoleon and one of the Emperor Alexander's sisters. But besides considerations of foreign policy, the attention of Russian society at that time was turned with particular keenness to the internal reforms that were then being carried out in all parts of the government. Life, meanwhile, people's real life, with its essential concerns of health, illness, work, rest, with its concerns of thought, learning, poetry, music, love, friendship, hatred, passions, went on as always, independently and outside of any political closeness or enmity with Napoleon Bonaparte and outside all possible reforms. Prince Andrei had been living in the country for 2 years without a break. All those undertakings which Pierre had initiated on his estates and had not brought to any result, constantly changing from one thing to another, all these undertakings, without talking about them to anyone and without any noticeable effort, had been carried out by Prince Andrei. He possessed in the highest degree that practical tenacity, lacking in Pierre, which kept things in motion without any big gestures and efforts on his part. On one of his estates of 300 souls, the peasants were registered as free plowmen. This was one of the first examples in Russia. On some others, the corvée was replaced by quitrent. A trained midwife was invited to Bogucharovo at his expense to help women in childbirth, and a priest was paid to teach the children of the peasants and servants to read and write. Prince Andrei spent half his time at Bald Hills with his father and his son, who was still in the care of nannies, and the other half in his Bogucharovo cloister, as his father called his estate. Despite the indifference he had displayed to Pierre towards all external events in the world, he followed them assiduously, received many books, and, to his own astonishment, noticed, when people from Petersburg came to visit him or his father, fresh from the very whirlwind of life, that these people, in their knowledge of all that was happening in the external and internal politics, were far behind him, who sat all the time in the country. Besides being taken up with his estates, besides being generally taken up with reading the most varied books, Prince Andrei was taken up that time with a critical analysis of our last 2 unfortunate campaigns and with drawing up a project for change in our military regulations and statutes. In the spring of 1809, Prince Andrei went to his son's Ryazan estates, of which he was the trustee. Warmed by the spring sun, he sat in his open carriage, looked at the first grass, the first birch leaves, and the first billows of white spring clouds racing across the blue sky. He was not thinking about anything, but looked around cheerfully and meaninglessly. They crossed the ferry on which he had talked with Pierre a year before. They drove past a dirty village, threshing floors, sprouting fields, down a slope with residual snow by a bridge, up a slope of muddy clay, past strips of stubble and bushes greening here and there, and entered a birch woods on both sides of the road. It was almost hot in the woods. The wind was not felt. The birches, all strewn with sticky green leaves, did not stir, and the first green grass and purple flowers were poking through and lifting up last year's leaves. Small fir trees scattered here and there among the birches were an unpleasant reminder of winter with their crude evergreen needles. The horses began to snort as they drove into the woods and sweated more visibly. The footman, Pyotr, said something to the coachman. The coachman answered affirmatively, but evidently the coachman's sympathy was not enough for Pyotr. He turned on the box toward his master. "Your Excellency, how light it feels," he said, smiling respectfully. "What? It feels light, Your Excellency." "What's he talking about?" thought Prince Andrei. "Ah, the spring, probably," he thought, looking about. "So it is. Everything's green already. So quickly. Birches and bird-cherry and alders already beginning, but no sign of oaks. And there's one. Ah, there's one." At the side of the road stood an oak, probably 10 times older than the birches of the woods. It was 10 times as thick and twice as tall as any birch. It was an enormous oak, twice the span of a man's arms in girth, with some limbs broken off long ago and broken bark covered with old scars. With its huge, gnarled, ungainly, unsymmetrically spread arms and fingers, it stood, old, angry, scornful, and ugly, amidst the smiling birches. It alone did not want to submit to the charm of spring, and did not want to see either the springtime or the sun. Spring and happiness and love, the oak seemed to say, And how is it that you're not bored with the same stupid, senseless deception? Always the same, always a deception. There is no spring, no sun, no happiness. Look there, sit those smothered dead fir trees, always the same. Look at me, spreading my broken, flayed fingers everywhere they grow, from my back, from my sides. As they've grown, so I stand, and I don't believe in your hopes and deceptions. Prince Andrei turned several times to look at this oak as he drove through the woods, as if he expected something from it. There were flowers and grass beneath the oak as well, but it stood among them in the same way, scowling, motionless, ugly and stubborn. Yes, it's right, 1,000 times right, this oak, thought Prince Andrei. Let others, the young ones, succumb afresh to this deception, but we know life. Our life is over. A whole new series of thoughts in connection with the oak, hopeless but sadly pleasant, emerged in Prince Andrei's soul. During this journey, it was as if he again thought over his whole life and reached the same old comforting and hopeless conclusion, that there was no need for him to start anything, that he had to live out his life without doing evil, without anxiety, and without wishing for anything. Section 2. On business to do with the trusteeship of the Ryazan estates, Prince Andrei had to see the provincial marshal of nobility. The marshal was Count Ilya Andreevich Rostov, and in the middle of May, Prince Andrei went to see him. It was now the hot period of spring. The woods were now fully clothed. It was dusty and so hot that passing by water, one wanted to go for a swim. Prince Andrei, cheerless and preoccupied by considerations of one thing and another that he had to ask the marshal to do with business, was driving up the garden avenue of the Rostovs' home in Otradno. From behind the trees on the right, he heard merry feminine cries and saw a crowd of girls running across the path of his carriage. Ahead of the others, closer, a dark-haired girl came running towards the carriage, very slender, strangely slender, dark-eyed in a yellow cotton dress, her head tied with a white kerchief, from under which strands of loose hair escaped. The girl was shouting something, but seeing the stranger, ran back laughing without looking at him. For some reason, Prince Andrei suddenly felt pained. The day was so beautiful, the sun was so bright, everything around was so cheerful, and this slender and pretty girl did not know and did not want to know of his existence and was content and happy with some separate, probably stupid, but cheerful and happy life of her own. What is she so glad of? What is she thinking about? Not about military regulations, not about setting up quid-renters in Ryazan. What is she thinking about, and what makes her happy? Prince Andrei asked himself with involuntary curiosity. In 1809, Count Ilya Andreevich was living in Otradno in the same way as before, that is, receiving almost the entire province with hunts, theatricals, dinners, and musicians. He was glad to see Prince Andrei as he was to see any new guest, and almost forced him to spend the night. In the course of a boring day, during which Prince Andrei was entertained by the older hosts and the most respected guests who filled the old count's house on the occasion of an approaching name-day party, Bolkonsky glanced several times at Natasha, who was laughing at something and having fun among the other young half of the company, still asking himself, what is she thinking about? What is she so glad of? In the evening, left alone in a new place, he could not fall asleep for a long time. He read, then put out the candle, but lit it again. The room, with the shutters closed from inside, was hot. He was vexed with this stupid old man, as he called Rostov, who had detained him, assured him that the necessary papers had not yet been brought from town, and vexed with himself for having stayed. Prince Andrei got up and went to the open window. As soon as he opened the shutters, moonlight, as if it had been watching at the window a long time waiting for that, burst into the room. He opened the window. The night was fresh and stilly bright. Just under his window was a row of trimmed trees, black on one side and silvery bright on the other. Under the trees was some juicy, wet, curly growth, with touches of silver on its leaves and stems. Further beyond the black trees was some roof, glistening with dew. To the right, a big curly tree with a bright white trunk and branches, and above it a nearly full moon against the sky, nearly starless spring sky. Prince Andrei leaned his elbows on the windowsill and fixed his eyes on the sky. Prince Andrei's room was on the middle floor. There were also people in the rooms above him, and they were not asleep. He heard feminine talk overhead. "Just one more time," said a feminine voice overhead, which Prince Andrei recognized at once. "But when are you going to sleep?" another voice replied. "I don't want to. I can't sleep. What am I to do?" "Well, one last time." Two feminine voices sang some musical phrase which made up the end of something. "Ah, how lovely. Well, now let's sleep. That's the end." "You sleep. I can't," the first voice answered, coming close to the window. She evidently leaned all the way out of the window because he could hear the rustle of her dress and even her breathing. Everything became hushed. Everything became hushed and stone still, like the moon and its light and shadows. Prince Andrei was also afraid to stir, lest he betray his involuntary presence. "Sonia, Sonia," the first voice was heard again. "How can you sleep? Just look how lovely it is. Ah, how lovely. Wake up, Sonia," she said, almost with tears in her voice. "There's never been such a lovely night." Sonia made some grudging reply. "No, just look, what a moon. Ah, how lovely. Come here. Darling, dear heart, come here. Well, you see? I'd like to sit on my heels like this, take myself by the knees, tight, tight as possible. You've got to strain, and fly away like this. Enough, you'll fall." Sounds of a struggle were heard, and Sonia's displeased voice. "It's past 1 o'clock. Oh, you just spoiled everything for me. Well, go, go." Everything fell silent again, but Prince Andrei knew she was still sitting up there. He heard an occasional quiet stirring, an occasional sigh. "Ah, my God, what on earth is it?" she suddenly cried. "If it's sleep, it's sleep," and she slammed the window. "She doesn't care at all about my existence," Prince Andrei thought, all the while he was listening to her talk, for some reason expecting and fearing that she would say something about him. And she again, as if on purpose, he thought. In his soul there suddenly arose such an unexpected tangle of youthful thoughts and hopes, contradictory to his whole life, that, feeling himself unable to comprehend his own state, he fell asleep at once. Section 3. The next day, having taken leave of the Count alone, without waiting for the ladies to come out, Prince Andrei drove home. It was already the beginning of June when Prince Andrei, on his way back home, drove again into the birch woods, where that gnarled old oak had struck him so strangely and memorably. The ringing of the harness bells had struck him. The ringing of the harness bells was still more muffled in the woods than a month ago. Everything was filled out, shady and dense, and the young firs scattered around the woods did not disrupt the overall beauty, and imitating the general character showed the tender green of their fluffy young shoots. The whole day had been hot. There was a thunderstorm gathering somewhere, but only a small cloud was sent. Only a small cloud had sent a sprinkle over the dust of the road and the juicy leaves. The left side of the woods was dark, in the shade. The right side, wet, glossy, sparkled in the sun, swayed by the wind. Everything was in flower. Nightingales throbbed and trilled, now near, now far. Yes, here in this woods was the oak that I agreed with, thought Prince Andrei. But where is it? He thought again, looking at the left side of the road, and not knowing it himself, not recognizing it, he admired the very oak he was looking for. The old oak, quite transformed, spread out a canopy of juicy dark greenery, basked, barely swaying in the rays of the evening sun. Of the gnarled fingers, the scars, the old grief and mistrust, nothing could be seen. Juicy green leaves without branches broke through the stiff 100-year-old bark, and it was impossible to believe that this old fellow had produced them. Yes, it's the same oak, thought Prince Andrei. And suddenly a causeless springtime feeling of joy and renewal came over him. All the best moments of his life suddenly recalled themselves to him at the same time. Austerlitz with the lofty sky, and the dead, reproachful face of his wife, and Pierre on the ferry, and a girl excited by the beauty of the night, and that night itself, and the moon. All of it suddenly recalled itself to him. No, life isn't over at the age of 31, Prince Andrei suddenly decided, definitively, immutably. It's not enough that I know all that's in me. Everyone else must know it too. Pierre and that girl who wanted to fly into the sky. Everyone must know me, so that my life is not only for myself, so that they don't live like that girl, independently of my life, but so that it is reflected in everyone, and they all live together with me. Having returned from his trip, Prince Andrei decided to go to Petersburg in the fall, and thought up various reasons for this decision. A whole series of reasonable, logical arguments for why it was necessary that he go to Petersburg and even serve was at his disposal every moment. He did not understand now how he could ever have doubted the necessity of taking an active part in life, just as a month earlier he had not understood how it could ever occur to him to leave the country. It seemed clear to him that all his experiences of life must go for naught and be meaningless if he did not put it to work and again take an active part in life. He did not even understand how, on the basis of such poor rational arguments, it could have been obvious before that he would humiliate himself if now, after his lessons in life, he should again believe in the possibility of being useful and in the possibility of happiness and love. Now, reason suggested something quite different. After his journey, Prince Andrei began to be bored in the country. His former occupations did not interest him, and often, sitting alone in his study, he would get up, go to the mirror, and look at his face for a long time. Then he would turn away and look at a portrait of the late Lisa, who, with her hair curled à la grecque, looked at him tenderly and cheerfully from the gilt frame. She no longer said terrible words to her husband as before. She looked at him simply and cheerfully with curiosity. And Prince Andrei, putting his hands behind his back, would pace the room for a long time, now frowning, now smiling, thinking over those irrational thoughts, inexpressible in words, secret as a crime, that were connected with Pierre, with Glory, with the girl on the windowsill, with the oak, with feminine beauty and love, which had changed his whole life. In those moments, if anyone came into his room, he was particularly dry, stern, resolute, and in particular, unpleasantly logical. Mon cher, Princess Maria would say, coming in at such a moment, Nikolusha mustn't go for a walk today. It's too cold. If it were warm, Prince Andrei would answer his sister with particular dryness at such a moment. He would go only in his shirt, but since it's cold, you must put warm clothes on him, which is why they were invented. That's what follows from the fact that it is cold, not that this child must stay at home when he needs air. He would say, with particular logicality, as if punishing someone for all that secret illogical work that was going on inside him. On these occasions, Princess Maria reflected on how such mental work dries men up. Section 4. Prince Andrei arrived in Petersburg in August of 1809. This was the time when the glory of the young Speransky and the energy of the reforms he carried through were at their apogee. That same August, the sovereign was overturned while driving in his carriage, injured his leg, and stayed in Peterhof for 3 weeks, seeing Speransky daily and exclusively. This was the time of the preparation not only of the two famous decrees which so alarmed society, on the abolition of court ranks and on the examinations for the ranks of collegiate assessor and state councillor, but also of an entire state constitution, which was supposed to change the existing judicial, administrative, and financial order of management in Russia, from the Council of State to the local board. Now came the realization and embodiment of those vague liberal dreams with which Alexander had taken the throne, and which he had been striving to realize with the aid of his helpers, Czartoryski, Novsiltsev, Kochubey, and Stroganov, whom he jokingly referred to as his Comité de Salut Public. Now they had all been replaced by Speransky on the civil side and Arakcheev on the military. Soon after his arrival, Prince Andrei, being a gentleman of the chamber, appeared at court and at a levee. The sovereign met him twice and did not deign to say even one word to him. It had always seemed to Prince Andrei, even before, that he was antipathetic for the sovereign, that the sovereign disliked his face and his whole being. In the dry, distant gaze with which the sovereign looked at him, Prince Andrei found still more confirmation of this supposition than before. The courtiers explained the sovereign's inattention to him by the fact that His Majesty was displeased that Bolkonsky had not served since 1805. I know myself how little control we have over our sympathies and antipathies, thought Prince Andrei, and therefore there's no use of thinking of presenting my memorandum on military regulations to the sovereign personally, but the matter will speak for itself. He told an old field marshal, his father's friend, about his project. The field marshal appointed a time, received him benignly, and promised to report to the sovereign. A few days later, Prince Andrei was told that he had to appear before the Minister of War, Count Arakcheev. At 9 o'clock in the morning of the appointed day, Prince Andrei appeared in Count Arakcheev's anteroom. Prince Andrei did not know Arakcheev personally and had never seen him, but everything he knew about him inspired little respect in him for this man. He is a minister of war, the sovereign emperor's trusted man. His personal qualities are nobody's business. He was entrusted with considering my memorandum. Consequently, he alone can set it in motion, thought Prince Andrei, waiting among many significant and insignificant persons in Count Arakcheev's anteroom. During his service, mostly as an adjutant, Prince Andrei had seen many anterooms of significant persons, and the differing characters of these anterooms were very clear to him. Count Arakcheev's anteroom had a completely special character. The insignificant persons waiting in line for an audience in Count Arakcheev's anteroom had feelings of abashedness and submission written on their faces. The persons of higher rank had faces expressing a general feeling of awkwardness, concealed behind an appearance of casualness and mockery of oneself, of one's position, and of the person they were waiting to meet. Some paced up and down pensively, others whispered and laughed, and Prince Andrei heard the sobriquet Sila Andrich, and the phrase, "Uncle will give you what for," referring to Arakcheev. One general, a significant person, apparently insulted at having to wait so long, sat crossing and recrossing his legs and smiling contemptuously to himself. But as soon as the door opened, all the faces instantly expressed only one thing: fear. Prince Andrei asked the officer on duty to announce him once more, but he was looked at with mockery and told that his turn would come in due time. After several persons were led in and out of the minister's office by the adjutant, the fearsome door received an officer who had struck Prince Andrei with his humiliated and frightened look. The officer's audience lasted a long time. Suddenly, the thunder of an unpleasant voice was heard from behind the door, and the officer emerged, pale, his lips trembling, and clutching his head, passed through the anteroom. After that, Prince Andrei was led to the door, and the officer on duty said in a whisper, "To the right, by the windows." Prince Andrei entered a tidy, unostentatious office and saw by the desk a 40-year-old man with a long waistcoat, a long, close-cropped head, and thick wrinkles, with scowling brows over dull hazel-green eyes and a drooping red nose. Arakcheev turned his head towards him without looking at him. "What's your petition?" asked Arakcheev. "I am not petitioning for anything, Your Excellency," Prince Andrei said softly. Arakcheev's eyes turned towards him. "Sit down," said Arakcheev, Prince Bolkonsky. "I am not petitioning for anything, but the sovereign emperor has deigned to pass on to Your Excellency the memorandum I submitted." "You see, my most gentle sir, I have read your memorandum," Arakcheev interrupted, speaking only the first words benignly, again without looking him in the face, and lapsing more and more into a grumbling, contemptuous tone. "Proposing new military regulations? There are many regulations and no one to carry out the old ones. Everyone writes regulations these days. It's easier to write them than to follow them. I have come by will of the sovereign emperor to learn from Your Excellency what chances you intend to give to the memorandum submitted," Prince Andrei said courteously. "I wrote a decision on your memorandum and it was passed on to the committee. I do not approve," said Arakcheev, getting up and taking a paper from his desk. "Here." He handed it to Prince Andrei. Across the paper was scrawled, in pencil, without capitals, without orthography, without punctuation, "Unsoundly compiled since copied from French military regulations and unnecessarily deviating from military articles." "To what committee has the memorandum been passed?" asked Prince Andrei. "To the Commission on Military Regulations, and I have proposed that Your Honor be enrolled as a member, only without salary." Prince Andrei smiled. "I do not wish any." Member without salary, repeated Arakcheev. My respects. Hey, call him in. Who's next? He shouted, bowing to Prince Andrei. Section 5. While waiting to hear about his enrollment as a member of the committee, Prince Andrei renewed old acquaintances, especially with those persons whom he knew were in power and could be useful to him. He now experienced in Petersburg a feeling similar to what he experienced on the eve of battle, when he fretted with anxious curiosity and was irresistibly drawn to the higher spheres, where the future was being prepared, on which the fates of millions depended. He sensed by the spitefulness of the old man, by the curiosity of the uninitiate, by the reserve of the initiate, by the haste and preoccupation of all, by the countless numbers of committees and commissions, and he learned of the existence of new ones every day, that now, in the year 1809, here in Petersburg, some enormous civil battle was being prepared, of which the commander-in-chief was a mysterious person still unknown to him, who he imagined to be a genius, Speransky. And both the matter of reform, which he vaguely knew, and Speransky, who was its chief promoter, began to interest him so passionately that the matter of military regulations was very soon shifted to a secondary place in his consciousness. Prince Andrei occupied one of the most advantageous positions for being well received in all the highest and most diverse circles of Petersburg society at that time. The party of the reformers cordially welcomed and courted him. First, because he had the reputation of being intelligent and well-read, and second, because, by granting freedom to his peasants, he had already earned himself a reputation as a liberal. The party of the disgruntled old men turned to him directly for sympathy as his father's son, condemning the reforms. Feminine society, the world, welcomed him cordially because he was an eligible young man, rich and well-born, almost a new personage with the aura of the romantic story of his alleged death and his wife's tragic end. Besides that, the general opinion of him among all who had known him before was that he had changed greatly for the better in those 5 years, had softened and matured, and there was none of the former affectation, pride, and mockery in him. But there was that serenity which comes with age. People talked about him, were interested in him, and everyone wished to see him. The day after he visited Count Arakcheev, Prince Andrei went to a soiree at Count Kochubey's. He told the Count about his meeting with Sila Andrich, as Kochubey called Arakcheev, with that vague mockery of someone which Prince Andrei had noticed in the Minister of War's anteroom. Mon cher, said Kochubey, even in the matter you cannot avoid once more. Mon cher, said Kochubey, even in this matter you cannot avoid Mikhail Mikhailovich. C'est le grand faceur. I'll tell him. He promised to come this evening. What concern does Speransky have with military regulations? Asked Prince Andrei. Kochubey smiled and shook his head, as if surprised at Bolkonsky's naivete. He and I were talking about you the other day, Kochubey went on, about your free plowmen. Ah, so it's you, Prince, who freed your muzhiks, asked an old man of Catherine's time, glancing scornfully at Bolkonsky. It's a small estate that brought no income, replied Bolkonsky, so as not to vex the old man for nothing, and trying to soften his act before him. Vous craignez d'entrer en retard, said the old man, looking at Kochubey. One thing I don't understand, the old man went on. Who's going to work the land if they're freed? Writing laws is easy, but governing is difficult. It's the same thing I ask you now, Count. Who will be the heads of departments if everyone has to pass examinations? Those who pass, I suppose, Kochubey replied, crossing his legs and looking around. Here I've got Pryanishnikov serving under me. A nice man, good as gold, but he's 60. Is he going to take examinations? Yes, that makes it difficult since education is not very widespread. But Count Kochubey did not finish, stood up and asked Prince Andrei, taking Prince Andrei by the arm, went to meet a tall, balding, fair-haired man of about 40, with a large open forehead and an elongated face of unusual strange whiteness. The entering man was wearing a dark blue tailcoat, a cross on his neck, and a star on the left side of his chest. It was Speransky. Prince Andrei recognized him at once, and something in his soul shook, as happens at important moments of life. Whether it was respect, envy, or expectation, he did not know. Speransky's entire figure was of a special type, by which he could be recognized at once. In no one of the society in which Prince Andrei lived had he seen this calm and self-assurance of clumsy and obtuse movements. In no one had he seen such a firm and at the same time soft gaze of half-closed and slightly moist eyes, such firmness of a totally meaningless smile, such a thin, smooth, soft voice, and above all, such tender whiteness of the face, and especially of the hands, somewhat broad, but extraordinarily plump, tender, and white. Such whiteness and tenderness of face Prince Andrei had seen only in soldiers who had spent a long time in the hospital. This was Speransky, Secretary of State, Counselor to the Sovereign, and his companion at Erfurt, where he had been seen and spoken with Napoleon more than once. Speransky did not shift his eyes from one face to the other, as one does involuntarily when entering a large company. He was in no hurry to speak. He spoke softly with the assurance that he would be heard, looked only at the person with whom he was speaking. Prince Andrei followed every word and movement of Speransky with special attention. As happens with people, especially with those who judge their neighbors severely, Prince Andrei, on meeting a new person, especially one whom, like Speransky, he knew by reputation, always expected to find in him the full perfection of human virtues. Speransky told Kochubey that he was sorry that he could not come earlier, but he had been detained in the palace. He did not say that he had been detained by the sovereign, and this affectation of modesty Prince Andrei noticed. When Kochubey named Prince Andrei for him, Speransky slowly transferred his eyes to him with the same smile and silently began to look at him. "I am very glad to make your acquaintance. I have heard about you, as everyone has," he said. Kochubey said a few words about the reception Arakcheev had given Bolkonsky. Speransky's smile widened. "The director of the Commission on Military Regulations is a good friend of mine, Mr. Magnitsky," he said, articulating every syllable and every word. "And if you wish, I could bring you together with him." He paused at the period. "I hope you will find sympathy in him and desire to further everything sensible." A circle formed itself at once around Speransky, and the old man who had spoken of his subordinate Pryanichnikov also turned to Speransky with a question. Prince Andrei, without entering into the conversation, observed all the movements of Speransky. This man, recently an insignificant seminarian, who had now held the destiny of Russia in his hands, those white, plump hands, as Bolkonsky thought. Prince Andrei was struck by the extraordinary, scornful calm with which Speransky answered the old man. He seemed to address his condescending words to him from an immeasurable height. When the old man began talking too loud, Speransky smiled and said that he could not judge the advantage or disadvantage of what pleased the sovereign.